Okay, Linda Gibbs, would you tell us what's happening in New York?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. So if you can imagine, I'm the one with the muddy boots on and down in the trenches on the local level, trying to dig into the issue of poverty in New York City and see if is something that we can do to move it off the really unacceptably high levels that we experience. Under the official federal poverty measure, 18% of our population, lives in poverty. And when we began this, it was at the beginning of the mayor's second term. He wanted to take a look at it, and he wanted to hear back from all of his commissioners and program folks, what can we do to make a difference? Our city is just too great and has too much opportunity. We just should not accept that 1.5 million people live in poverty. And so despite the fact that I had actually worked at that point over 20 years in the social services in New York City, that was the beginning of my understanding of the federal poverty measure. And so we started mapping it. What are the demographics of poverty? What's the age of poverty? What does it look like in our various communities? And I started to get exposed to some of the dialogue around the measure. And so I was like, oh, well, that's an interesting, theoretical dialogue that folks in Washington are having, and I'm going to keep up with that. And we were putting our strategies together, and my boss is kind of a data-driven guy. He likes to know if you're trying to improve something, what's your baseline, and how are you going to improve, and how much is that going to improve it. And I just remember the sort of the crystallizing moment, I think, in why we knew that we had to change the measure in New York City. We have the wonderful finance commissioner, and because we tax so much, we also have some tax credits, and so we have a local earned income tax credit. And as a result of that, we have everybody's tax records. And our finance commissioner, Martha Stark, said, well, everybody works really hard. We bring workers and case managers out to the community to advise people on how to do their earned income tax credit and submit it and improve the take-up rate. You know what? I can do it automatically. I can just I have all the income, I can pre-populate the forms, I can stick it in an envelope with a self-addressed stamped return envelope, I can mail it out. All they have to do is sign it, and like that, we can get them their EITC back. And not just the cities, but the city, state, and federal. And so the mayor's like, oh, Martha, you're brilliant, this is great. Linda, how much is that going to change the poverty rate? And I had to look at him and say, it's not. And he's like, what? And there's two important lessons there. Obviously, we know from the research on the EITC how it does contribute to poverty reduction. Over the long term, how it incentivizes employment and earnings, and it reduces poverty. We know it. It's proven. Despite that fact, because we couldn't show the immediate impact of that income in the household income for the purpose of calculating poverty, that enterprise taking on that initiative sort of got discounted in our in sort of the thinking about, well, is that what we should do right now? So not only does the current poverty rate not really accurately reflect the face of poverty, it actually can discourage you from doing the right things and might even encourage you to do the wrong things. The cheapest way, if you want to move the poverty measure, not the cheapest way, it's expensive, but the quickest way to do it is to buy your way out. Just give people more money. Go reverse welfare reform, increase the cash grants, get everybody back on welfare, and you're going to change the poverty rate. But we know that's the wrong thing to do. And so I think it's both about not portraying, for local folks like me who are trying to really dig in and figure out how to do things differently, not portraying an actual picture, an accurate picture that helps you to come up with sort of the best policy directions, but also the fact that it doesn't reflect successes where successes in fact will reduce poverty and might discourage the appropriate paths. So with all of that, then we started searching the world for the best poverty measures, and so we looked. I discovered relative poverty and how they measure relative poverty in Europe. I love material deprivation as a measure, which in England and the UK and Ireland is being used. And what it does is ask sort of a short list of questions, and it really tries to measure whether the stuff you have in your house indicates whether you're in poverty or not. Simple things like, does everybody in the household have 2 good pair of shoes? Do you have a winter coat? One of my favorites, do the parents get to go out at least once a month without the kids? right? And so you really have a sense, do you have enough money to not have a material deprivation? But it's hard. And so we searched the world and searched the world and searched the world and came back to the conclusion that for the purpose of actually doing an updated measure for New York City to help us measure the result of our work, that we were going to embrace the NAS standard. It's well known, it has a lot of legitimacy, there's a lot of research behind it, it's more accessible and administratively to make happen, lots of reasons that we settled on it. So I'll give you just a quick few results of what came out of that in New York City. So this is 2 adults, 2 kids, family of 4. The current national poverty threshold for that household is $20,444. Nationally, under the NAS, and we use the NAS, but for I won't say that I actually read the whole book. It's like a big fat book. It keeps my papers down on my desk. Within that, it's not actually a prescriptive methodology. It goes through all the segments and it gives you options. It says you can do it from here to here, from 10 to 15, from you can pick this or that. It's a range of options, not fully executed. So we made our best judgments, and not wanting to be controversial, if there were ever ranges, we just went right in the middle. Under that, we calculated the national poverty threshold without regional variations to be 21,818. So one might ask, what's the big to do about? It's only it's only a $1,400 increase on the threshold. The big to do when you get to New York City is that when you apply the regional cost of living adjustment based on housing, it got the New York City threshold up to 26,138. That's a pretty big jump. Moved our poverty rate from 18.9 to 23.4. So it was a pretty significant increase. It was another time my boss's estimation in my mind always goes up, and the day that we got through that briefing and he still said go ahead and do it, I was like, all right, they went up again. A quick couple of words about the impact. The elderly poverty did go up the most, from 18% to 32%, mostly driven by medical out-of-pocket costs. Our child poverty flat, so no higher, no lower than under the official measure. Slightly lower, like a little over 0.5% lower for all kids, but significantly for children in one-parent households where we know poverty is the highest, the biggest drop, albeit from 44% down to 41%. And then just a couple of other basic demographic, geography of poverty changed. If you look at a poverty map under the official threshold, big, intense blobs of poverty in central Brooklyn, South Bronx, northern Manhattan. Under the NAS application in New York City, it's much more widely dispersed. You get based on the immigrants, working poor, and elderly. And so you see the poverty map looks much different in New York City. And so the last thing, and it's really interesting for those who are fascinated. You can get this report online. The last thing I would say is that why it's important for the federal government to take this on for localities. We have a lot of localities that are very interested in doing this. LA, San Francisco, up in Seattle, the state of New York, potentially the state of California, Philadelphia. People are really eager. They say, oh, great, send us the disc and we're going to run it and pop it out the other side. And when they sit down and they realize how much time and effort and money we spent on doing it in New York, that we're lucky enough to be able to devote to this, they quite frankly just cannot garner the resources, particularly at this point in time, to make it happen. So there's a lot of interest in places in order to have this tool at their disposal, but technically they are having a tough time coming up with strategies to make it happen.